many years ago. Our building, we worked in the basement of the building that was cinder block. And when we had earthquakes, you could watch the ceiling move. You just sit there and watch it go. As long as it wasn't a real bad earthquake, you didn't have to do anything, but the building would do one of those numbers. So this doesn't look particularly good, does it? Pretty bad all the way around. And one of the things that we note about attitudes is that the object can be the work environment, co-workers, which is Dee Dee and the two fellows, the fellow, supervisor, which is Mr. Wattori. Do you think that Joe has a positive attitude about Mr. Wattori? What is your evidence? And there was direct evidence in the scene. See if you can remember what he did.
Kind of like make the face or something when he's hot.
Precisely. When he walks by, he goes something like this because Wattori is saying, "Can he do the job?" Whatever the thing is, I've heard it 1,000 times, but I don't have it memorized. And he's there just reciting over and over again. Now, whatever your work environment is, and this is for everybody, Los Alamos is on screen and all the sites that we have, compare it to this one. See if you have worked in an environment as negative as this one is. Okay, let's take a break. I don't know what that's all about. And we can restart at 2, and we're going to go on to personality. Okay.
Yeah, we'll just let you know if we can do that through left. Because I only think I'll do questions.
All right, let's get started. There's still some people, if they're returning, they haven't returned yet. So, let's go back. I want to take you to the personality section of Chapter 5, and I want to have some fun with this. It gets a little heavy because the personality theories, although I didn't spend an enormous amount of time describing them for you, I basically have summarized them in 2 pages at the most, have a history that goes back to the early part of the 1900s. And some of the original stuff said that people's personalities begin from the time that they're born, but pretty much they become a blank piece of paper. At birth, it's a blank piece of paper, and it's going to develop over time. Now that one, with the blank piece of paper notion of personality development, we have the idea that no aspect of the person's heritage, biological heritage, have any effect on their final personality. There were several approaches to it. Most of it is based on learning, so that if you go back to when you were young people in grade school, and maybe if you can remember how you behaved when you were, say, 6 years old, you were interacting in your family. If you had siblings, then you were interacting with siblings and against siblings, interacting with parents, getting guidance of whatever sort from parents. And also, as you developed a little bit older, you got out into the neighborhood, interacted with friends and non-friends, get into grade school, you have all the interactions that go on there, and all the way up to now. Now, that line of thinking, covered by a lot of what's in Chapter 5 in that section, says you develop from what you learn. And if you get reinforced to go in a certain direction in behavior, then that behavior becomes anchored in your core personality. So if you learn, for example, in your family, that it's really good for you to do well in school, then you may veer toward a fairly strong achievement-oriented personality and come out with a characteristic and some of the characteristics of the personality types that we have in Chapter 5. Now, another line of thinking comes from a different source, and it suggests that there are biological bases to human personalities. And this gets a wee bit controversial because it says each of us has a certain biological heritage. And I've commented a few times about my heritage, which is 100% French, going back to 1400 something in southwestern France, and we've been able to trace it. And however, I grew up in a family. I have a sister, and she's 2 years younger than I am. My father died when I was 12 years old, so the family changed a bit at an early age. And a lot of experiences, did the Air Force stuff and did some stuff in Connecticut and Texas, San Diego, blah, 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 traveled, and so on. But the biological research is based primarily on, listen, hear this carefully, please, on identical twins raised apart. You follow me on that. The biology is the same of the identical twins. That means they come from the same egg. Reared apart. They never saw each other in their lives until perhaps later in life, but after they participated in the study. That line of work was done partly in the Scandinavian line of research and in the United States, two really big research centers. And the results of it, and it's in the area on the page 108, behavior genetics and so on, is showing some compelling evidence that we are going to have to give to our genetic background some aspects of our personality development. So perhaps you've had the following experience. When you were growing up, your mother said, "You're behaving just like Uncle Jim or Aunt Sally." I'm making up the names, obviously. Well, I'm going to assume that the reference to Uncle Jim and Aunt Sally is to one of your mother's sisters or brother. So they share a common genetic pool. Or you behave because we also know, and I'm sorry, I have to say this because my wife's involved in breeding dogs. We know how to do it with dogs, and it sometimes skips a generation, and they pick up the characteristics of a grandparent. And you often design the breeding program so that you build on it, and you know what the grandparents are, and that seems to affect what is the result. So we have two things happening here. We are what we are imprinted with at birth, and then we add a bunch of stuff to it, which is called the social side. And you can't escape the social side unless you happen to exist as a hermit from birth throughout your entire life. That means you don't interact with a single human being. You may interact with animals, but not human beings. What is your reaction to this? That's what these two pages say. I'm just giving you an overview. You buy it?
Makes sense. It's kind of like nature versus nurture.
The research is really compelling. This is not just, gee, I wonder what's going on. It's some pretty heavy-duty stuff happening to suggest the results. We, by the way, have absolutely no trouble coming to this conclusion in breeding animals. We're animals, but I mean non-human animals. But when it comes to human reproduction, we have a bit of a problem in suggesting, you're who you are because if I knew something about your grandparents and, the lineage and so on, we'd be able to come to some conclusion. Okay, yes?
Well, it kind of makes sense when you look at it that way. If you compare it to like diseases that are that you inherit from your grandparents and stuff like that, why is it that much different?
Yeah, we're talking, she commented on inheriting diseases, and then when we get down to behavior, for example, the way that you interact with another person in terms of aggression or achievement or affiliation, and how much of that comes from the genetic pool and how much of it comes from the behavioral pool.
Like they found that social anxiety and just other forms of anxiety are actually inherited from, within the gene pool and stuff like that. So that'll affect, the way you act towards other people. So I don't know if you necessarily call it disease, but it's things you inherit that would affect your behaviors.
Right, right. So what you can do as a form of reflection is to consider what your heritage is, who your grandparents are, and whether there are similarities. The stuff coming out of the research with twins raised apart is compelling, because they're raised in different social environments, and they end up having extraordinarily similar personality characteristics. Well, there's another side to all of this, and there's a major section that deals with emotions and emotional intelligence. And before we comment on this, what do you know about it? Your common experiences. Anything at all? This is talked about in the press. It's discussed here and there. Okay, so let's go and see what we find. Well, we'll start with a definition. It's a feeling. Emotion is a feeling, psychological state, and a biological state that affects behavior. Undoubtedly, you have encountered one or more people whom you perceive as extremely emotional. That is, they're expressing their feelings in a way that's in your face. And Chris, you're laughing, but does it ring home with you?
Yeah, my girlfriend.
In a relationship, this stuff can get really dicey. So let's see if we can make some sense out of it. And emotions can quickly start behavior with almost no conscious thought. A person just jumps and behaves. And maybe Chris's girlfriend is doing this. And the person, I'm not going to take it to the point of out of control, but where the person doesn't think before acting, and you're smiling.
Yeah, well, I can relate to that.
You can relate to it.
Jumping or saying, what'd you just say? Saying before you think?
Basically, acting before thinking.
Yeah.
Okay. Do what both of them are doing and reflect on self and reflect on relationships to see how this works out. We know we have a collection of emotions that define two aspects of an individual, the person's temperament and their basic personality. And Chris is smiling again. And we distinguish between two kinds of emotional minds. Notice on the slide it says the heart brain and the head brain. The heart brain drives the emotion because of the feeling. The head brain analyzes it. And sometimes what's particularly problematic to manage, and she's really identifying with this, I think. If you have, in a relationship, you have one person has a heart brain and the other person has a head brain. Can you see the potential for difficulty and conflict? Okay. Now stay again, I'm repeating it deliberately. Heart brain is the reaction to feelings, head brain is thinking it through. Now here are the basic emotions. They're shown on page 109 and listed here, and these are the ones that we believe exist in all healthy human beings: anger, disgust, fear, joy, sadness, shame, and surprise. There's some reason to believe that some others are coming our way that would become part of the basic emotions that people use in reacting to things. Along came the idea of emotional intelligence. We can't escape the emotions. They're part of the human, they're part of animals. And they are part of human animals. Now, for those of you who are parents, and I can reflect on this from my experience as a parent, in raising young children, you watch for the behavior that can get driven out of control by emotions, and you try to guide it, and guide it in a way that the individual is able to cope with those aspects. Okay, emotional intelligence is expressing emotions in self and appraising them in self and others. It is, why do I react the way I do? And why does the other party react, and can we talk about that? And it's a management process of managing emotion in self and others. And notice that unless we're hermits, we interact with other people. And we can't escape the emotion that's going to get into the interaction that causes us to go in a certain direction. And then we try to seek the adaptive use of emotions to guide behavior and solve problems. They are there. We can ask, why are they there? What is the person reacting to? And work with what the person is reacting to. The basis of emotional intelligence has 4 dimensions. Now try this on yourselves, and if you would volunteer, I don't want to embarrass anyone, so I'm not going to ask you to step up to this, but